Have you ever noticed that, even with access to all the knowledge in the world, you often feel lost, confused, and unable to think clearly? This is a cruel paradox of our time. We live surrounded by information, but increasingly distant from true critical thinking. The promise was grand. The internet emerged as humanity's great library, capable of democratizing knowledge, giving everyone a voice, and connecting ideas that were once confined to rare books or academic halls. Today, anyone with a cell phone has more data at their fingertips than a philosopher of the past could gather in a lifetime. And yet, we have never been so distracted, so superficial, so vulnerable to deception. Because information overload hasn't made us wiser, it's just more confused. Neil Postman already warned about this in Amusing Ourselves to Death. He said the greatest threat wasn't being deceived by lies, but being drowned in entertainment, unable to distinguish what matters from what is just noise. This is the anesthesia of the modern world. We don't lack content, but we have an excess of triviality. The avalanche of news, videos, opinions, and notifications creates the illusion that we're always learning, but in practice, we merely consume disconnected fragments. We jump from one stimulus to the next, from a headline to a joke, from a controversy to a meme. Everything seems urgent, but nothing lasts. And when everything is urgent, nothing is profound. The result is a fragmented mind. We know more and more about less and less. And we confuse being informed with the act of thinking. But thinking is different from accumulating data. Thinking is diving in, connecting dots, enduring the silence and solitude of a reflection that doesn't offer quick answers. But what does society teach us? To flee from silence. To hate emptiness. We're always with headphones on, screens in front of our eyes, our minds occupied by constant stimuli. And here's the problem. Those who can't stand being with themselves will hardly be able to bear to really think. This is the great paradox. We have access to infinite ideas, but we live trapped in digital bubbles that only reinforce what we already believe. Algorithms have become the new invisible censors. They don't tell us what we can't read, but they decide what we will see. They deliver exactly what we want, and in this comfort we lose the chance to be challenged. Critical thinking requires friction, confrontation with differences, and discomfort. But we're trained to react with hostility whenever something threatens our bubble. We retreat into what confirms our beliefs, rather than questioning them. And in the process we become superficial. It's like trying to drink from a waterfall. There's plenty of water, but it's impossible to quench our thirst. There's infinite content, but none of it allows us to truly understand. George Orwell may never have imagined the internet, but his warning in 1984 remains alive. He showed us that it's not just about controlling our bodies, it's enough to control our minds. Today we don't need an authoritarian state censoring us. We ourselves give our attention to systems that keep us distracted, saturated, and unable to distinguish the true from the illusory. Ultimately, it is not the lack of information that threatens humanity, but the excess of it. An excess that paralyzes us, that confuses us, that distances us from what is essential. And perhaps that's what scares us most, realizing that having knowledge at our disposal isn't enough. It takes courage to think about it, courage to step out of the current and dive deep, courage to choose silence amidst the noise. So the question for you is simple, yet disturbing. Do you really think about what you consume, or do you just consume to avoid thinking? Imagine living in a world where even the words you use no longer belong to you. Where language, the very thing that should express your inner freedom, has been carefully manipulated to limit what you can think. George Orwell not only imagined this world in 1984, he described it with frightening accuracy. And if we look around, we'll see that this warning has never been more relevant. In the novel, Orwell introduces us to the concept of duplicate pens, the ability to believe two contradictory things at the same time and accept both as true. It's a state of mental confusion where logic dissolves and manipulation becomes invisible. And perhaps without realizing it, we've all experienced something similar. Today we live with slogans that mean nothing but make us feel like we belong. Political speeches that seem profound but are merely empty repetitions. Marketing campaigns that sell happiness but only fuel frustration. We live surrounded by a language designed not to illuminate, but to anesthetize. And here is Orwell's great lesson. When language is corrupted, so is thought. Words shape reality. If we're bombarded with empty terms, if we repeat cliches without reflecting on them, our ability to think critically begins to weaken. After all, how can we question the world if we don't even have the right words to describe it? Today this doesn't just happen through politics. Digital culture does the same thing in subtle ways. Think about the terms we use every day: viral content, engagement, relevance, success. We almost never stop to ask what they really mean. Success for whom? Engagement in what? Relevance to what extent? This modern vocabulary shapes our perception without us even realizing it. It's as if we're living in a soft, colorful, and seemingly harmless version of Newspeak by Orwell, the official language of a world that wants not thinkers but consumers. And when we stop questioning words, we begin to accept any narrative. A lie repeated often enough ceases to sound absurd. The truth, spoken awkwardly, begins to seem strange. And on this slippery slope, power finds the perfect space to remain intact. Cognitive psychology has shown that our minds tend to operate on automatic mode. We react out of habit, through quick association, through mental shortcuts. Critical thinking, on the other hand, is slow, requiring effort, energy, and discomfort. And those who live immersed in constant stimuli have neither the time nor the inclination to practice this deeper form of thinking. This is where Orwell becomes more prophetic than ever. The real danger is not just being watched but being shaped. They didn't need to lock us in cells, they just needed to trap us in narratives. They didn't need to force the truth out of us. They just needed to convince us it wasn't worth seeking. Perhaps you felt this, that feeling of being surrounded by discourses, opinions, and truths that seem repeated ad nauseum, but which, when analyzed, say nothing. This emptiness is precisely the sign that language has lost its power to enlighten, and has become a mechanism of control. If we don't take care of the words we use, we won't have thoughts that truly belong to us. And if we don't have our own thoughts, we will be living other people's lives, even though we believe we are living our own. This is the invisible prison that Orwell tried to show us. And the question remains, how many of the ideas you carry today are really yours? And how many were shaped, repeated, pushed into your mind until they seemed natural? How many times in the last few days have you truly been present in a single moment, without feeling the compulsion to check your phone, change screens, or seek another distraction? Perhaps this is one of the most painful marks of our time. We live surrounded by stimuli but unable to remain. Everything pushes us away from the present, away from any depth. Zygmunt Bauman called this liquid modernity, relationships that slip through our fingers, fragile commitments, disposable experiences. Nothing lasts. Everything is temporary. We live rushing from one thing to the next, without roots, without time to mature. And in this incessant movement, depth becomes a luxury almost no one can afford. Social media is the most visible stage of this condition. It promises us connection but cultivates superficiality. It offers us community but fuels comparison. They hook us on tiny bursts of dopamine, as Dr. Gabor Mate describes when discussing the mechanisms of addiction. We don't think critically about what we consume because we're too busy chasing the next notification, the next like, the next instant approval. And the most paradoxical thing is that, in this process we believe we're living. We post, like, comment, and scroll endlessly. But when silence arrives, when night falls and the notifications stop, we feel an unbearable emptiness. Because we realize that nothing we consume has truly fulfilled us. Distraction has become humanity's most accessible drug. It's always at hand, always available, always willing to take us away from the pain of thinking. Because thinking, in fact, can be painful. It involves looking at internal contradictions, frustrations, and wounds we'd rather ignore. It involves facing life without anesthesia. And maybe that's why we run away so much. It's not that we don't have time to reflect, it's that we avoid reflecting. It's easier to chase quick stimuli than to bear the weight of a profound question. It's easier to laugh at a short video than to face the silence of a long night. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard wrote that, "The most desperate man is the one who never realized he was desperate." Today this is a portrait of our society. We live numb to distractions, believing we are fine, but hiding an anguish that is never faced. The consequences are brutal. We lose our ability to concentrate, contemplate, and engage in real dialogue. Our conversations are interrupted by vibrations in our pockets. Our thoughts are interrupted by incessant notifications. Even our dreams are colonized by images we saw on screens before falling asleep. And here an uncomfortable reflection arises. Does modern society not think critically because it has been deceived, or because, deep down, it doesn't want to think? Distraction is not just an individual vice, it is a collective control mechanism. A population that is constantly entertained, always busy, always saturated with stimuli, is a docile population, incapable of organizing resistance or seeking depth. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why can face any how. But he who loses his why becomes a slave to every distraction." And perhaps this is what we're living in. A culture that has traded meaning for entertainment, reflection for speed, depth for superficiality. Ultimately, the modern world offers us endless ways to avoid thinking, and we gladly accept them. But each acceptance takes us further away from the very thing that could set us free, the courage to dive deep even if it hurts. So I ask you, how many of your days did you actually live, and how many did you just scroll past to the next distraction? What happens to a society that no longer thinks for itself? What happens to an individual who delegates his ideas, his opinions, and even his desires to external forces that he barely recognizes? The price is higher than we imagined. When we stop reflecting, we lose not only our intellectual autonomy but also our existential freedom. We become vulnerable to ready-made narratives, empty slogans, and charismatic leaders who promise simple answers to complex dilemmas. We cease to be citizens and become spectators. We cease to be subjects of history and become pawns. Socially, the result is conformity. A mob that thinks little is easily led. It doesn't need to be violently repressed, it just needs to be entertained or distracted. Aldous Huxley had already predicted this in Brave New World. It wouldn't be fear that would control us, but pleasure. Not brutal censorship, but an excess of numbing stimuli. Orwell and Huxley, each in their own way, pointed to the same risk, the death of thought. And what happens inside us on a psychological level? We pay the price in the form of anxiety, apathy, and emptiness. When we don't think critically, we live at the mercy of others' opinions. We seek approval in every gesture, suffer from constant comparison, and feel like we have no solid ground under our feet. Because, in fact, we don't. Those who don't think for themselves live on flimsy crutches that can be taken away at any moment. Nietzsche called this herd morality, when we go with the flow, not out of conviction but out of fear of the loneliness of thinking differently. It's more comfortable to blend in with the crowd than to support an unpopular idea. But by choosing the comfort of the collective, we sacrifice authenticity. And the result is a second-hand life, lived by imitation, not creation. Just look at consumer culture. We're led to believe we need the latest model, the latest trend, the latest opinion. But we rarely stop to ask, do I really want this? Do I really believe this? Or am I just repeating what's been planted in me? This is the silent price of a lack of critical thinking. Living lives that are not entirely ours. In politics, we see spectacle replace substance. Leaders become more concerned with catchphrases than with real ideas. And we, viewers trained in the logic of social media, begin to react to these phrases as we react to any other digital content. With likes, with anger, with shares, but almost never with reflection. In our intimate lives, the toll is even deeper. Fragile relationships, disposable friendships, choices made more by social pressure than by genuine desire. We remain trapped in careers we don't love, in routines that suffocate us, in roles we didn't choose, simply because we never stop to question them. Carl Jung said that what is not brought to consciousness returns as fate. In other words, if we don't think about our lives, if we don't examine our motivations, we end up repeating unconscious patterns, always experiencing the same mistakes, always the same pain. And we call this bad luck, when in fact it's just a lack of reflection. The price of not thinking, therefore, is living on autopilot. It's becoming hostage to a world that thinks for you. It's giving up what could be an authentic life in exchange for a comfortable but empty one. And the most painful thing is that often we only realize this price when it's too late. When we look back and feel like something essential has slipped our minds. When we realize we've been busy all along but rarely present. When we discover we've lived a lot, but thought little. Perhaps this is the greatest danger of modernity, not only taking away our thoughts but making us not even miss them. And then the question arises that needs to echo within each of us. Are you really living your life, or just following the script they wrote for you? If modern society seems to have forgotten how to think, the solution won't come from ready-made formulas or quick fixes. Critical thinking isn't a skill you download like an app, it's an act of resistance, a gesture of courage, almost a form of silent rebellion. Because thinking hurts. To think is to expose oneself to the discomfort of doubt, to the loneliness of unanswered questions, to the burden of recognizing our own contradictions. It's much easier to entrust this task to someone else, a leader, an ideology, a fad. But every time we do this, we give up part of our freedom. Kierkegaard said that anguish is the vertigo of freedom. And that's exactly it. Truly reflecting is facing the abyss of choice, realizing that we are alone in life and that no ready-made answer can save us. It's hard, but it's also the beginning of authenticity. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps, wrote that he who has a why can face any how. The why, however, isn't found in distractions or other people's narratives. It arises from the silence of reflection, from the courage to seek meaning even in the midst of chaos. This is what critical thinking gives us back. Not only the ability to question the world but the chance to find meaning in it. And perhaps this is precisely what scares us most about the system we live in. A person who thinks for themselves is not easily manipulated. They are not seduced by every new trend. They do not bow to empty slogans. They may live among the masses, but they do not belong to them. And that, in itself, is an act of revolution. Therefore, the return to critical thinking is not just an individual choice, but a collective necessity. If we want a less manipulable society, we need to relearn how to endure silence, to cultivate the discomfort of doubt, to dialogue with ideas that challenge us. We need to reclaim patience, contemplation, the forgotten art of being present in a single thing in a single moment. George Orwell warned us, when we stop thinking, we make room for others to think for us. And perhaps today, more than ever, resisting means taking back control of one's own mind. So, I come back to the initial question. What if the true act of rebellion in today's world is simply thinking? I don't offer a closed answer because critical thinking doesn't thrive on definitive truths. What I offer is simply an invitation, for you to pause even for a few minutes and allow yourself to reflect. If this resonated with you, perhaps it is because a forgotten part of your mind still cries out for freedom. And perhaps freedom begins right here, in the simple, silent, and courageous act of thinking. If this reflection made you pause, perhaps it's because part of you needed to hear it. Here, we continue exploring the contradictions that make us human. If you want to join us on this journey of questioning and discovery, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes all we need is a reminder that thinking is still an act of freedom.